Ladies and gentlemen, this great red, white, and blue group of young people you're looking at are the Catch the Spirit singers from Celebration USA. Let's welcome them to the East Road.
That's wonderful. We've asked for a nice fee and travel expenses.
Hello, we are Celebration USA, Catch the Spirit Singers. Thank you for inviting us to perform for you today, as together we can celebrate President's Day and our American heritage. Did you know George Washington was the first Army general?
Yes.
He was also the first to sign the Constitution. Some beliefs of his were, Emily.
George Washington was known as the father of our country. When George Washington was a schoolboy, he copied down over 103 rules of civility and decent behavior in his notebook and committed them to memory. For example, "'Tis better to be alone than to be in bad company. Speak not when you should hold your peace." By obeying these rules, it helps to explain how George Washington achieved honor and fame when he became a man.
President Lincoln revered the Constitution, as Elizabeth and Catherine will explain.
Abraham Lincoln said, "Let every American, every lover of liberty, every well-wisher to his posterity support the Constitution. In short, let it become the political religion of our nation, and in particular, establish a reverence for the Constitution."
That's going to do it on here.
The Constitution lives in our land, you see. We sing of its great glory and declare our loyalty.
It's on. Yeah, I made Time magazine.
Yeah.
That's pretty nice.
So anyway, I contacted the photographer in Rapid City and had it all lined up. So then I called the Park Service that runs the place and told them, I just wanted to get some publicity shot. Oh, well, you gotta have a permit.
Oh my.
So they sent me the contract.
Article 1, the
This way, right on. Yeah.
Isn't that a terrific group? Let's give them one big hand.
Very good. Very good. Very good.
You're going to hear a little more from them at the very end. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Sandy Quinn. I'm president of the Richard Nixon Foundation. You are sitting in a replica of the biggest room in the White House in Washington, called, of course, the East Room. And in this room, 7 presidents laid in state. Many presidents socialized here. Teddy Roosevelt had the Rough Riders here. Abraham Lincoln bivouacked the Union soldiers. Abigail Adams hung big clotheslines up here and hung her clothes. On and on. We duplicated it here to have great events like this. And I want to tell you about a couple of them. On March 9th, we have 2-time former Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld coming to talk on this stage about his new bestseller, which opened yesterday as #1 on the New York Times list, called Known and Unknown. On April 1, we have Dick Morris. Tickets for these events are available, if you'd like them, at the museum store counter when you leave. Also, this is really important for all of you with kids and grandkids and a great love for the presidency. This summer, as we did last summer and the summer before, we're going to have a series, a 6-part series of a program very popular called Meet the Presidents. And we have George Washington, and we have Abraham Lincoln, and we have Richard Nixon portrayed by his brother, his younger brother Ed, who looks exactly like him. We have even Pat Nixon. We've introduced a First Lady this time. So these are free. They're on Tuesdays at 10:30 in the morning. And what we do is we put the parents kind of in the back there in chairs. We put all the kids up here on the floor. And the presidents talk about their life and legacy. That's followed by some coloring time where you can color their birthplaces and their homes and their pets and so on. And then we do punch and cookies. And I know that's why everybody comes. But still, it's a great educational program, and it's free. So watch our website, www.nixonfoundation.org, and you'll hear the details, and please come. Now, the program today is one that we've done every year for 20 years, where we have the great presidents of the United States come and meet and greet you as you come in. And I'm so glad all of you are here with your youngsters, because this is a great expression of love and interest, particularly for your kids, in the great institution called the American presidency. So what we're going to do is kind of hold a presidential press conference. And I'm going to bring them out in a minute, and they'll sit up here on the stage, and they'll each tell you a little bit about their presidency, particularly as it related to America's place in the world, which was somewhat limited in those days. When you compare, anytime you pick up the newspaper or look on television or check online, our involvement is universal. It's global. It's worldwide. But we want you to know what George Washington and his counterparts dealt with in their day. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to bring them in. This is the East Room at the White House. I'm going to ask you to stand and welcome Presidents George Washington, President Thomas Jefferson, President Abraham Lincoln, President Theodore Roosevelt. Teddy Roosevelt.
Boy!
There he comes, the original Rough Rider. Please welcome the Presidents of the United States. Now, what they're going to do is talk, they're going to talk for just a few minutes individually in the order of their taking office, and then we'll open it up to questions. So, kids, I want you to think up a question. Think up something you'd like to ask them, because I'm going to come back on afterwards and take this microphone and go around the room, and I want to see some hands up, because you're going to have questions you're going to want to ask. Ladies and gentlemen, our first president. Who was the first president of the United States? Who won the Revolutionary War for America? Did somebody say Martha Washington? I know somebody said Bill Clinton. That's not true. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, the first president of the United States, the Honorable George Washington.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Frankly, Martha did help win the Revolutionary War. In the 105 months of the war, she was with me 52 months. That's almost half the time. That's where the phrase Lady Washington came from, because every time Lady Washington would come in the wintertime, the troops would rejoice and they'd be very happy. As you know, I'm number one. You came in and you saw the Time magazine having all the, with the President Nixon, whose place we honor today. But I made Time magazine too, as the first president. Now it's very interesting. I did not want to be president. I didn't want to be president of the Constitutional Convention, which is the greatest presidency that I had, because I helped give you the Constitution. But then I didn't want to be president of the United States. And when they told me at Mount Vernon, Mr. President, you are unanimously elected, I didn't want to do that. And Martha she was so provoked, she didn't come till May to New York. But I had to borrow $600 to go to be president of the United States at New York, because I was inaugurated in New York City. And when I took the oath of office, I knew what the oath was because I helped to prepare it. And I added the words, "So help me God." And I brought the Bible to my lips and kissed the Bible, because I knew I could not handle this. I told Henry Knox, I said, it's like a culprit going to his execution. Now, everything was first. I had no one to look by and say, what will happen? I chose my cabinet, the finest and best people. Not that they agreed with me, as Mr. Jefferson will probably tell you, because he and I disagreed, but I held on to him just as long as I could. Now, I had to take many stands. We had to pay a debt, $54 million we were in debt, and the states, $25 million. In my day, that was an awful lot of money. And frankly, we restored credit throughout the world. I negotiated treaties. I kept the peace. Some of you know that I was inaugurated with my sword, but not with the uniform, because I didn't want it to appear like it was a military takeover. But I was commander-in-chief, and in 1794, when the farmers in western Pennsylvania decided that they were not going to pay taxes after all, that's what the Revolutionary War was about. But that was with taxes without representation. They had representation. And so we had to do something, and I, as commander-in-chief, put back the uniform, and I went out to western Maryland to review the troops, 22,000 troops, and went on and crushed the rebellion as commander-in-chief of the United States of America. We started a bank that brought prosperity to our country and credit throughout the world. We bolstered the Army. We started a Coast Guard. We started a Navy. We got rid of the western forts where the British were still enthroned. And we brought peace and prosperity to this land. Something that you may not know. In my first term as president, I made the tour of the northern states. Now that was hard back in my days, but I went into every major city of the northern part of our country. And then in the second year of my administration, I made the southern tour, 1,816 miles to the day. If you can imagine the piney woods of Georgia, going in those days to go to all the cities. But when I went before Congress at the State of the Union, I could tell the State of the Union at that time. By the time my 2 terms were up, I wanted to go home. I did not want to stay on forever. I wanted to go home after the first term. They convinced me because of the French Revolution to stay on for the second term. Then I went home to be under my own vine and fig tree. Now, I got $25,000 a year. I didn't want any money. But what happened was that the first year after I left the executive mansion, which was in New York for 2 years and Philadelphia for 600 overnight guests came to Mount Vernon. They drank my wine, and they ate my food, and their horses ate all my hay. And I paid for it all. So I hope that you will enjoy this day, and if we can answer any questions, please ask them.
Of course, most of you recognize me, Thomas Jefferson, as the third President of the United States. I was also the second Vice President of the United States, the first Secretary of State of the United States under President Washington. And while most of you know me as a politician and public figure, after all, I was also Governor of Virginia, Minister to France, delegate to the Continental Congress, and member of Virginia's House of Burgesses. And while most of you know me for my political achievements, I would like to be remembered most for these three achievements. Founder of the University of Virginia, author of Virginia Statute on Religious Liberty, and most important, the author of the Declaration of Independence of the United States. Bravo. Yeah. When I spent those 3 weeks of June and July of 1776 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, writing this declaration, I wanted it to be an expression of the American mind and spirit. And in it I proclaimed and wrote, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." What I meant by this is that the whole concept of rights, they do not come from governments. Governments do not issue us those rights. They come from a power greater and mightier than any of us. A God, a Jehovah, an Allah, a mighty spirit, Mother Nature, whatever you wish to call it. It is that same power that put the order in our universe that gave us those rights, and no government can take them away from us. As I also said, thank you. And why do we organize governments? We organize governments to protect our rights and our property. And that when governments no longer protect our rights and our property, then we have the right to change it by every means necessary. We had peacefully petitioned the British King in Parliament for redress of our grievances, but our petitions and protests were either ignored or rejected by King and Parliament. And when they sent their army against the good people of Massachusetts, we of the 13 American colonies had no other choice but to take up armed struggle against the British Empire. And when I finally wrote, and when we approved this Declaration of Independence, we pledged to ourselves our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. For if we lost, we would not just be losing our property and our wealth, but we would endanger our families, and yet we could also lose our very lives. We could all be hanging at the end of a British noose. But after 6 years of armed struggle and 2 years of negotiations, we finally won our independence. And now we had the responsibility of governing our new nation, and I was proud to help serve our nation. I represented our nation as our minister or diplomatic representative to France. I became Secretary of State in President Washington's cabinet. Now, we did have some differences over neutrality concerning the war between Britain and France, but I later would go on to become Vice President and then President of the United States in 1801. And yet, we still had not resolved the problem between Britain and France. They were still at war. Our ships were being harassed. And I urged the Congress to pass a series of acts called the Embargo Acts, which would forbid trade with any belligerent nation. Unfortunately, New England, which was dependent upon trade with Europe, nearly went bankrupt. So we repealed those laws before the end of my second term, and following the example set by President Washington, I decided to retire after 8 years as president. I felt those 8 years were nothing more than a splendid misery. But my greatest achievement as president was that of the purchase of the Louisiana Territory. And you know I am not talking about merely what is the state of Louisiana, but the territory between the Mississippi River and the Rocky Mountains. Our settlers were crossing the Appalachian Mountains, settling into the new states of Kentucky and Tennessee, and into the future states of Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois. They needed to get their goods to market. The only way they could do that was through the port of New Orleans, which at that time was controlled by France. But any nation that controlled New Orleans, be it France, Britain, Austria, Russia, Prussia, or Spain, could easily control 3/8 of our commerce. So I sent my 2 ministers to France, James Monroe and Robert Livingston, to negotiate with the head of the French government, Napoleon Bonaparte, who was planning a war for all-out control of Europe. And he was in desperate need. He had no need for any territories in North America, and he was in desperate need of cash. And although I am a strict constructionist, and I believe that the president should only do what is specified in the Constitution, I realized we had a fait accompli. If we did not take this territory, either Britain to the north or Spain to the south could easily seize it, and we would be confined to the eastern coast of North America. So, with the stroke of a pen, I doubled the size of the United States. We paid only $15 million for it. And even though that may seem, and even in my time, that was not considered a lot of money, but we realized we paid approximately $1 an acre for this new territory. And to explore it, I sent my personal secretary, Meriwether Lewis, and his good friend, Mr. William Clark, to explore this territory. And after 2 years, they had sailed up the Missouri River, had even left the territory by going all the way to the Pacific Ocean. And when they came back 2 years later with the most complete report on this territory, I knew we had made the right decision. because I believe this territory will satisfy thousands upon thousands of generations of Americans, because I believe that is the future of our nation, through our farmers. By going west into our new territories, they will develop it. And by developing it, we will admit new states. And by becoming property owners, they will become voters who will see that our republic will grow and strengthen. And with that, I take great satisfaction in setting in motion what I believe will be a trend, not just towards Western expansion, but to see our nation one day grow to become a great continental nation, transcontinental nation, stretching from the Atlantic to the Pacific. And I also take great pride in hoping to live to next July 4th of 1826, the 50th anniversary of the founding of this nation. And I hope that I will live to that day, as well as my old friend and colleague and even former political opponent, Mr. John Adams. It would be so wonderful if we could both live to that day. And so when I live to that day, I would like to ask this one last question. Is this the fourth?
Well done, sir.
Thank you.
Do we introduce? My fellow citizens, I should tell you, of course, as you well know, we're in a war now with the Confederate States of America. But how does it affect the rest of the country? How does it affect across the seas? But you see, I had my Secretary of State, Mr. Seward, and on one occasion, we were having a problem. It seems that one of my ships, and the captain of that ship, intercepted a British warship, intercepted a British ship on the high seas. You cannot do that, as I told my Secretary of State. And it wasn't long, and I had to tell Mr. Seward, one war at a time. I already have one. I don't need another one with England or France. But this is the problem. But it was the ship, the British ship was called the Trent. And there were two men on board that ship who were Confederates. They were the diplomats that the Confederate States had sent to England and France. Mason and Slidell. And some call it, yes, the Mason-Slidell affair. I'd rather not have the affair at all. But you see, what effect does it have really on this country? That was my problem. The Confederate States were looking at this affair now with rather glee. Yes, they were. I think in some respects, and something within me says, those two men who were not really knowledgeable about diplomacy or in any country across the seas, Jefferson Davis had but one thought: King Cotton. Cotton was king. If I can withhold cotton from France and from England, pretty soon they're going to be asking for it. They're going to be coming over to get it, and that means greater things for us. The question came up, did they put Mason and Slidell on that ship to make sure that they were intercepted by our Union warship? Did they plant those two men because it was very deliberate, because they went from one ship to another ship, from one country to another, before they ever set sail for England. Very interesting. But it caused a great commotion in France and England. The English were ready to go to war with us at that point. And it took cooler heads and a lot of diplomacy in order to keep that from happening. You see, at the same exact moment that some of these things were unfolding, and time between the messages coming from England and France all the way back here to the United States. And it seems that the English at that point had already put together a flotilla of warships carrying some 3,600 British soldiers, plus the militia that were in Canada, and they were going to Canada. And they were stationed on the Canadian border. Yes, even in the Battle of Gettysburg, there were Canadian troops, British troops, stationed on that border in the event that the Union was unsuccessful in that battle at Gettysburg. But there was something that happened previously to that, a very, very, very great moment, because this war really wasn't caused by slavery, but slavery is at the bottom of the entire war. Slavery. But you see, I issued an Emancipation Proclamation January the 1st of 1863. And that proclamation kept France and England immediately from acknowledging the Union as a separate sovereign country. Can you imagine what would have happened if England had started the war with us? The Confederacy, I would have two wars, one with England in the Canadian part of this country, and one with the Confederate States of America, a civil war, both going at the same time. I don't have to draw you a picture. You should be able to take and look at that immediately, and what a tragedy that would be for this country. Would that be the end of this great place we call America, the United States? That was quite a time for me and this country, because my only purpose, my one really and purpose in taking this presidency was that I felt deeply within me that I could help keep this country together and keep it undivided. That was my goal. And then came the provision of slavery, and I had to there in that one time, the Emancipation Proclamation, it had to be done at the perfect moment in time, politically and here at home for everybody within this great country. Hope that gives you just a little bit better appreciation for all of the things that have happened in this country, and particularly the Civil War. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you.
What a bully group you've got assembled here, Mr. Chairman. Perhaps you're not familiar with the word bully. You see, it was my favorite word. Today you might use words like cool or neat, rad when something occurs that you hear. But in my day it was bully. So if you hear anything from this platform here this afternoon that particularly is endearing to you, I want you to shout out bully. Let's try that, shall we? 3, 2, 1.
Bully.
Ah, almost as loud as they did it in my day. I don't know about my colleagues here, about their time as in the presidency, but I had a bully time as president. You see, I was president from 1901 until 1909. So that's a little over 100 years ago now, and I thoroughly enjoyed every moment there. You see, I'm privileged here to share the platform here with number 1, the indispensable man, and number 3, Thomas Jefferson, and my hero, number 16. And perhaps one of the youngsters in the group knows what number I am. Anyone know what number I was? 26, indeed. 26. What a bully state this is, California. This is not my first visit. You see, I was here back in, I think it was 02, perhaps 03. When you get to be my age, those years all blend together. I was visiting many parts of the state. In fact, I spent about 4 or 5 days up in the Yosemite. Have you been there? Oh, what a bully place. How about a bully for Yosemite? Bully. I spent time there camping and tramping with a young Scotsman. His name was John Muir. You know him. Johnny Muir. He and I spent many nights around campfires there up in the Yosemite. I came down this way. In fact, I stayed at a place called the Mission Inn in Riverside, the city of Riverside. Have you been there? Ah, bully. I gave a speech in the thriving metropolis of Redlands, California. About as famous as your Belinda, I understand. How many of you, particularly the youngsters, have a teddy bear at home? Have you ever thought of why they're called teddy bears? Would you like to hear the story of why they're called teddy bears? How about a bully for that? Bully! Well, you see, I was a hunter. And it was in 1903, October, I went out on a bear hunt. Now, when you're the president and you go out on a hunt, you don't go alone. There's a lot of people, particularly the boys from the newspapers, who have to come along. And we went down to Mississippi in October, and we were hunting through the swamps of Mississippi. Oh, there was a nip in the air in the early morning, but we got up there very early, had our breakfast around the campfire, and then we went out hunting for bear. And we hunted all day long. And we didn't see a single bear. Oh, I had a bully time. Bully. And I couldn't wait until the next morning when we woke up very early in the morning and we hunted all day long. And we didn't see a single bear. Now, I still had a grand old time, a bully time. But the boys from the newspapers were getting a little worried because they came out to get a story. They wanted to see the president get a bear. And we went 2 full days and didn't see a single bear. So they went out there. They found a couple of local boys who knew the territory, and they asked them if they could find a bear for us. And they did. They found a bear who must have been in a scrap because his leg was pretty well mangled up, but he couldn't walk or run. So they captured the bear. And they tied him to a tree. Now here's this wounded bear tied to a tree, and they brought me over and they handed me my trusty Winchester rifle and said, "Mr. President, there's your bear. Take your shot." Now I was a sportsman. You don't shoot a wounded bear, let alone one that's tied to a tree. So I put my rifle down, held my hand up, and I said, "No, this is sport." And now the newspaper boys had their story. And they rushed off to write their story, and there were political cartoonists. You know, they used to draw cartoons of me, all sorts of grotesque cartoons. Usually they drew my teeth much bigger than they were. And one of the cartoonists drew a cartoon of me out in the camp with the bear tied to the tree, but he took a little liberty with that. I guess they call that literary license, I don't know. But instead of drawing the wounded bear, he drew a baby bear cub. And so the cartoon was printed in newspapers throughout the land with me putting my rifle down in the baby bear cub. Now, I was born in New York City, you see, in 20th Street, just off of Broadway. In fact, my house is still there. I understand the National Park Service operates it as a museum these days. So if you ever find yourself in New York City, 20th Street, just off of Broadway, you can visit my birthplace. Well, there was a fellow there who owned a toy store. And his wife used to make these stuffed animals and put them in the window of the store. Well, after that cartoon came, people started buying the bears, and they kept asking for more bears. And she couldn't make them fast enough. Well, the owner of the store wrote a letter to me at the White House. It was called the Executive Mansion. But while I was in there, we changed the name. We said the Executive Mansion sounds a little stuffy, so we changed the name to the White House. Indeed, bully. So he wrote a letter to me at the White House and asked me if it would be okay with me if they called these little stuffed animal bears Teddy's bears. And I thought that was a bully idea. A few years later, that little toy shop became the Ideal Toy Company. And one of my sons, that may have been Kermit, came to me and said, "Dad, you should have negotiated a better deal." But that's how they came to be known as teddy bears. You see, I was president a little over 100 years ago. I was the very first president to ever drive and own my own automobile. And they didn't last long, you see, because I was a good horseman. And I always rode horses. and I always relied upon the horses to stay out of the ruts, to stay on the road. And I never had to pay attention to staying on the road. Now, when I was in an automobile, it was my responsibility to avoid the ruts, and I didn't do that very well, so I don't know how many automobiles I crashed and wrecked. Newfangled gadgets, and I was the very first president to put telephones in my home. At first I thought they were a good idea, but then they became rather annoying, you see, because prior to the telephones, if someone wanted to speak with me, they had to make an appointment. And after the telephone came in, they thought they could interrupt me any time of the day or night. And now I look around at you all and see people wear their telephones now, like they're fashion statements or something. But anyway, we'll be here this afternoon, and perhaps there might be a press conference and give you an opportunity to ask some questions of number 1, number 3, number 16, and number 26. Bully.
Very good. Bravo. Bully. Well done, sir.
Thank you, Mr. President. Now, I told you that they'd be available for questions, and I was going to look around and hope some youngsters or adults had questions. Anybody? Just raise your hand. Anybody? You do? Okay.
I hope I can hear. I just hope I can understand.
Over here to the right.
Don't everyone
Hello,
leave.
I'm Jason, and President Lincoln, I have a question for you. What play were you watching when you were assassinated at Ford's Theater?
What play?
What play?
What play?
Yeah.
What play, American Cousin?
What play was I watching at Ford's Theater? It's called Our American Cousin. And yes, a wonderful play. I just don't remember the ending.
Here's a question.
When were you born?
Who?
Which
First
one?
president?
George.
George.
George. I was born February the 11th, 1732. Now you're going to say, oh, he doesn't even know when he was born. Yes, February 11th, 1732. However, that was old calendar. 20 years later, they added 11 days to my birthday as well as everybody else's, so that's why it's February 22nd, 1732. 279 years ago.
Bully.
Hey, hey.
Okay, my question My question is to President Roosevelt. What is your greatest achievement, in your opinion?
My greatest achievement, there's been so many, but probably the contribution to conservation in this grand nation. 5 national parks, we created the National Forest Service, national reclamation projects, federal bird reserves, and the list goes on and on and on. Over 230 million acres preserved for future generations like yourselves.
Thomas Jefferson, what is your favorite book?
What?
I'm sorry, what was the famous book?
Favorite book?
What's your favorite book?
My favorite book. I have so many. I have such a library full of books, I cannot live without them. And yet, I sold many of them to begin to help rebuild the Library of Congress after it had been burnt by the British when they invaded Washington, D.C. in 1814.
Here's one in the middle.
Mr. Washington, what do you think was the most contributing factor to you winning?
Winning the war? The French. No, I think it was because if you go out to my display, you will see a flag. It's the Commander-in-Chief flag. It has been around since 1775. The only reason they make those flags today is to mark my grave at Mount Vernon, and that flag did that. I put that flag over my headquarters so that my troops always knew that I was in camp, the flag would fly. That flag officially only came down 8 days in 8.5 years. It meant that the men stayed with me because I stayed with them.
Hello, Mr. President. What I'd like to know is, with the world that we live in that's become so complicated now, what kind of things do you think would be our challenge to keeping the union together, and that's for any one of or more than one president because of the complications that we have now in the world that we live in?
Go ahead.
Basically, question.
How do we keep the union together in this complicated world that we live in?
Well, it's been so long ago since my world. I wanted to be under my own vine and fig tree. I wanted to retire at Mount Vernon. I wanted to live my life, but they kept knocking on my door. The Constitutional Convention, we'd like you to come. The presidency, we'd like you to come. The second term, we'd like you to come. I finally said, no, I'm going home, and I'm going to live my life. And I think sometimes that I did not want to get involved in politics. 600 people came to my house after I became president to talk politics. I wanted to go to bed and rest. They drank my wine and ate my food, and their horses ate my hay. But I wanted to stay at home, be myself, and I gave myself. I said, how much more must I do for my country?
Yeah.
I don't know if that answered it, but I got you guys off the hook.
My name is Jacob Haley. I'm 9 years old, and my question is to Thomas Jefferson. What presidential party were you in, and what did it stand for?
Oh, yes, a very good question. I was a Democrat-Republican. No, I will explain. Many of you, we originally were Republicans. During the time of the Washington administration, I had many disagreements with my counterpart in the cabinet, Alexander Hamilton. He believed in a federalist concept of a strong national government centered on our cities among the elite. I believed in states' rights. I believe in order to protect the rights of the states and of the individual against that of a strong national government. And naturally, I had some disagreements with President Washington, but I do give him credit. He always put himself above partisan politics. I know he didn't care for it much, but Even in 1792, I recall Mr. Hamilton and I, even despite our disagreements, both urged President Washington to remain as president because we felt only he could hold our new nation together. But after I left the cabinet in 1793, I felt we should have supported France in its war against Britain. Those who began to share my concerns about an increasingly strong national government we began to organize ourselves into a new political party, and we called ourselves Republicans or Democratic Republicans in opposition to the Federalists. And eventually, I was elected as its candidate for president in 1800.
Hi, my name is Rachel Wirt, and I'm 10 years old, and I have a question for Abraham Lincoln. Will you say some of the Gettysburg Address?
The Gettysburg Address?
Yes.
They want it?
No, all of it or some? She just said she wanted some of it.
Just say some of it.
87 years ago. But how many is a score? The Bible says it's 20 years. 80 is 80 plus 7. That's 87 years from the Declaration of Independence on July the 4th, 1776, until November the 19th of 1863. 87 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. All men are created equal. From the Declaration of Independence, the greatest document in the world to me, along with the Constitution of the United States. One nation under God, because those men who sat there on that occasion of the 13 colonies meeting in convention, and they prayed to Almighty God in order to make that happen, and they did. That's part of it there. A new birth of freedom. What kind of freedom am I talking about? I'm talking about a freedom that comes from the Bible again. John 3:8, I believe. A new birth of freedom. A new birth. The Bible, the good book says, you must be reborn again of the Spirit. This country, this United States has to be reborn with a new spirit in it. It has to be patriotism. It's there. A government of the people, by the people, for the people, as they, gentlemen, have said, these presidents. You are the government of this country. You, the people, govern yourselves. Thank you very much.
Very well said.
I'm Joshua Bobbitt, and seven years old. My question is for Theodore Roosevelt. What college were you in?
College? I went to Harvard. And I took boxing while I was at Harvard. And when I went out west to be a cowboy, you had to prove yourself. And I was challenged to a fight. The first day I was there in the Dakota Territories. And what they didn't know was that I took boxing. And I never lost a fight out west. Bully. Well, of course, I was only in one fight, and I knocked the other man down cold.
My question is for Peter. When were you born?
Which
When were you born?
Which one?
When were you born?
Was that for President Roosevelt? When were you born?
1858. New York City. Bully!
I'm Callie Descalzo. I'm 11 years old and I have a question for Theodore Roosevelt. I was wondering if you could tell us a little about your safari trip in Africa.
I could tell you a lot about my safari trip in Africa. But we don't have time. But what I did is after I left the presidency, I went to Africa on a safari under an agreement with the Smithsonian Institution. Perhaps you've heard of them. They run a museum in Washington, D.C. And it was a scientific expedition, not just a hunting trip. And we collected specimens, many of them the very first specimens of their kind. And some of those animals we brought back from that safari in the 1911, are still on display today in the Smithsonian Museum of Natural History. Olé!
My name is Charlotte. I'm 8 years old, and I have a question for George Washington. What is the story of the American president and cherries?
Cherry tree? Well, let me tell you, you can go to my table, and you will find the original book, the original first edition copy of Weems's book, The Life of Washington. The story is quick. It says when George was 6 years old, he was made the proud owner of a hatchet, which he went about hacking everything that came into his path. One day, while in his mother's garden, hacking his mother's pea stalk, he unluckily tried the edge of the hatchet on a beautiful young English cherry tree, which he barked so terribly that I don't even know if it survived. When his father saw what had happened, he said, "Who did this to my tree?" He said, "Pa, I cannot tell a lie. I did it with my hatchet." Of which his father said, "Run to me, my son, run to me. In transports to my arms, for what you've given me is worth more than 1,000 trees, though blossomed with silver, and their fruit as purest gold." That's the authentic story. Anything you've heard other than that is not authentic. Whether it was true when I was 6 years of age, 273 years ago, I can't remember.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's thank our presidents.
I guess we could. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. Let's welcome the great Catch the Spirit singers to close from Celebration USA.
Why don't we sit down and watch them?
Afterwards, ladies and gentlemen, if you'd like to take your pictures with the presidents, we'll speak to their Secret Service details and ask them to stick around for a few minutes of photography if you have your cameras.
You want to back up? You can back up more.
Move back? Yeah, let's move back.
Yeah. No,
That's right,
guys.
No,
That's
you're
all
okay.
right. Wonderful. You're
We're
good.
versatile.
Sorry?
Hold that stuff back there.
Ladies and gentlemen,
Yeah, you don't want to trip on
That's
this.
theirs.
No, the seatbelt is like.
There we go.
There you
I think it went well.
I think it went very well.
Boy. Great questions and,
Sing
Good
good,
results.
otherwise they'll pinch you down.
I loved your thing. I loved your thing. You are better than what's his name up
Dale?
there? Dale? I mean, Dale's good, but
The only thing is,
Freedom
if I was
is a
casting,
precious
I wouldn't
gift.
pick me to be Jefferson.
Our gallant
If I
servicemen
was a
and
casting
women
director, though, I would be my last
are called
choice.
upon to fight, even lay down their lives to defend our freedom. There are 5 branches of the military. Each branch is distinguished by their own motto and song. They are
Army, this will defend.
Navy, full speed ahead.
Marines, Semper Fidelis, always faithful.
Coast Guard, Semper Paratus, always ready.
Air Force, aim high. America's Air Force, no one comes close.
We would now like to present our tribute to the military. If you are a veteran, active member, or have a loved one serving, we invite you to, and you hear your branch's song, we invite you to stand or wave and be recognized.
We would like to thank you for inviting us to perform for you today, and would like to close with these thoughts.
President John F. Kennedy said in his inaugural address, "Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. My fellow citizens of the world, ask not what America can do for you, but what together we can do for the freedom of man."
We are Celebration USA. Now you go out and catch the spirit.